Altaira Radio Theatre presents the Altaira Haunted Halloween Special. This evening, we will be presenting two works of Edgar Allan Poe. We will also provide you with ghastly tales brought to us by you, the audience. Tonight, we invite you to listen to stories of loss and madness, the work of a man misunderstood and whose very image can be as chilling as his tales. We'll start the evening with one of Edgar Allan Poe's most famous works, a poem of a man in a struggle to forget, but eternally cursed to remember his lost love. Sit close and hear the woeful tale of the Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember. It was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is, I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here, I open wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched upon my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven. ghastly, grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird upon his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak out from my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the meaning of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Edgar Allan Poe was very misunderstood. Often portrayed as a drunken, womanizing madman with no morals and no friends, Poe's image is in large part due to an obituary and memoir written by a man named Rufus Griswold. Griswold's intent was to dismiss Poe and his works in retaliation to criticism from Poe himself. In the end, it only increased his sales and furthered his legacy as the poet we romanticize today. By doing so, perhaps, as in the case of our next story, he was able to take his revenge on Griswold. The following tale shows a most clever man and his plan to take his revenge in a most horrifying way. Listen now to the Cask of Amontillado. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that by my smile there was any thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards, he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack, but in the matter of old wines he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cone, cap, and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you're looking today. But I've received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts."
How? Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible. And in the middle of a carnival?
I have my doubts, and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain.
Amontillado.
I have my doubts.
Amontillado.
And I must satisfy them.
Amontillado.
As you are engaged, I'm on my way to Lucrezi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me...
Lucrezi cannot tell Amontillado from Shep.
And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own.
Come, let us go.
Whither?
To your vaults.
Oh, my friend, no, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucrezi
I have no engagement. Come.
My friend, no. It's not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They're encrusted with niter.
Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing, Amontillado. I have been imposed upon. And as for Lucrezi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado.
Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux. Giving one to Fortunato, I bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode.
The pipe.
It is farther on, but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication.
Niter?
Niter. How long have you had that cough? My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes.
It is nothing.
Come, we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrezi.
Enough. The cough's a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough.
True. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Here, drink.
I drink to the buried that repose around us.
And I, to your long life.
These vaults are extensive.
The Montresors were a great and numerous family.
I forget your arms.
A huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel.
And the motto?
Nemo me impune lacesset. No one attacks me with impunity.
Good.
The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons, with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The niter, see, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough...
It is nothing. Let us go on, but first, another draught of the Medoc.
He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one.
You do not comprehend?
Not I.
Then you are not of the Brotherhood.
How?
You are not of the Masons.
Oh, yes.
You? Impossible. A Mason?
A Mason.
A sign. A sign.
It is this, I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelier a trowel.
You jest. But let us proceed to the Amontillado.
Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed herein is the Amontillado. As for Krasinski,
He is an ignoramus.
He stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet, horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other, a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand over the wall. You cannot help feeling the niter.
Indeed, it is very damp.
Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Oh, then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power.
The Amontillado!
True, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was a long and obstinate silence thereafter. I laid the 2nd tier, and the 3rd, and the 4th, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the masonwork, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment, I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess. But the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was nearing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato.
A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We'll have many rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine.
The Amontillado.
Yes, Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be waiting at the palazzo? The Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone.
Yes, let us be gone.
For the love of God, Montresor!
Yes, for the love of God! But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. Rest in peace. Quite the effort for revenge. But to Montresor, it was worth it. Let's hope no one seeks revenge on you. Who knows what schemes they could be planning. Before we end the evening, we ask the audience to now join us with some of their favorite ghost stories. Here is Amber Krasinski with Red-Headed Demon Child.
Hi, I'm Amber, and I'm here to tell you a story. So, for as long as I can remember, I've always been the odd one out in the family. I like Lord of the Rings. My family is really into Jeep rallies. I like foreign films. My family likes a good romantic comedy, or as my mom likes to call them, something nice. I enjoyed cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as a kid. My family enjoyed giving me confused faces when I brought up cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as a kid. Granted, as a family, we have a pretty big obsession with Halloween, but I definitely take the award for family weirdo. I always assumed I was just that kid until my mom, Trish, told me how I came into this world. Things started kind of making sense a bit. According to Trish, she had one heck of a pregnancy with me. Apparently, I had a shortened umbilical cord. So basically what that meant was anytime I moved around a lot, I would cause pretty significant internal bleeding. Sorry, Mom. It was wicked fun for all parties involved from what I've heard. So along with this, I kept trying to come out early, which was also no fun. Due to all of this, Trish was put on bed rest for the last couple months of her pregnancy and pumped full of drugs to prevent early delivery. This really sucked, but things took a turn for the weird. About 7 months into her pregnancy, my dad has a really weird dream. Just to give you an idea about my dad, short, Polish guy, dark hair, kind of stern, not quite. He dreamt that he was walking through the woods with this little redhead girl named Amber. Pretty wholesome, right? It was decided at that point that if I was a girl, they would name me Amber. Pretty nice. Fast forward to a couple months later. It's March. The due date has passed. Trish is hella grouchy for obvious reasons. Finally, one night while watching a movie with a friend and my dad, she goes into labor. Figuring she has a little bit of time to kill, she cleans up the house a bit before heading off to the hospital. The drive to the hospital was fine, but apparently the back labor was not. Anyways. So they get to the hospital, right? Trish is in a ton of pain because back labor. This poor intern walks in and is trying to use some kind of monitor on her, but he can't figure it out. She told the intern that if you don't cut it out, I will kick you so hard in the face. So this scared child walks off. You might not have realized it yet, but Trish is one tough cookie. Like, I'm talking full-blown matriarch. She runs everything. She takes nothing from nobody. Hell, on one of those personality tests that's like, what's wrong with you? She got hyper resilient. Like, who does that? She handles things too well when they are really, really challenging. But this time, things are gonna put that to the test. So the nurses keep coming in, checking levels, blah, blah, blah. Then all of a sudden, Trish starts kind of fading in and out of consciousness. She then remembers a nurse walking in, screaming at the top of her lungs that she needs help and hitting a massive button. Then everything went dark. What she remembers next is being wheeled in a gurney down a hall lined with a team of medical professionals, trying to bring both of us back. She was floating above her body while watching as all of these people tried their best to keep us alive. Then everything goes dark again for a bit. She remembers being kind of pushed down and suddenly awoke to the worst pain of her life. She told me the other day that when she closes her eyes and thinks about it, she can remember how vivid that pain felt. Red hot pokers in her stomach as they began to try and take me out. Trish was in so much pain, in fact, that the nice anesthesiologist lady, who was very excited that she was back, put a face mask on her and was telling her to breathe and relax. My mother directed an expletive towards that woman that was obviously not very appreciated. This expletive was so loud that it reverberated down the hallway, much to the relief of my father, who was very grateful to hear that his wife's colorful language was back and that she, and hopefully the kid, were alive now. The operation proceeded, and my dad was allowed back in the room. They had kind of holed him off in this little closet spot because, you know, when people are dying, you might not want to watch that. So they took me out, and instead of being like a normal baby and screaming my head off, I just kind of looked around nonchalantly with my eyes wide open, kind of like this. I think being legally dead for a little bit kind of made me jaded with the whole OR situation, you know? So they hand me off to my dad, right? Who's already a little bit disturbed that his newborn baby is staring at him like a deer in the headlights. Poor guy was already freaked out enough, but to add to it, he takes one look at my hair and kind of freezes for a bit. fire engine red, just like the dream he had a couple months earlier. Wild, right? So after that, things kind of calmed down for a bit. Trish recovered, I did baby stuff, you know, the usual. My third day out in the world, though, something kind of neat happened. Then local radio personality Howard Stern, WCCC, was discussing the prevalence of C-sections during his show and asked his listeners to call in to talk about their C-section experiences, why they did it, blah, blah, blah. My dad, being the crafty, impulsive man that he is, pulled over on the side of the road, found a payphone, called into the station, patched him into my mom's room at the hospital, and boom, Trish is chatting with Howard Stern about how I had killed her, essentially, and C-sections aren't all that bad, even though they really suck. To be fair, not quite my fault, but I digress. All in all, being able to call myself a zombie has been super cool over the years, much to the chagrin of my mother. I like to think that all of this stuff is kind of like some fate situation. Like all of it happened for some sort of reason. I'm really not sure what that reason is, but I'd like to find out.
Altaira Radio Theater would like to thank you for joining us this evening. Happy Halloween. This is the Altaira Broadcasting System.